Hey YouTube, Joyboy here. So, today let's talk about Gear 4th Snake Man. And so I understand that this video might only be relevant for a few days, it might be relevant only for a few weeks. We cannot be certain when Oda will fully flesh out Gear 4th Snake Man, and all we have to go on right now really is the name itself. And I suppose Luffy's eyes. But I don't think that should stop us from speculating, because I know that the majority of us are very excited to see where Oda takes this. Are we gonna be wrong? Probably. Does it matter if we're right? No. Because honestly guys, even if we speculate, a lot of it is based on assumptions, a lot of it is testing our creativity versus Oda's. Speculating forms and powers, generally speaking, is basically just a lot of fanfiction. But despite saying what I just said to you right now, I do think that this is the time where the community can really come together and people can flex their creativity. But anyway guys, lead up aside, I do want to speculate about Gear 4th Snake Man, because there are things within the story which interest me, and there is an argument to be made to sort of justify what my opinion is for what Snake Man could be like, what kind of powers, what advantages, and the like. And so we're going to start this off in a very unorthodox way. We're going to start off by looking at one of Gear 4th's techniques, Gear 4th Bound Man's techniques, Culverin. If you guys don't remember, back during the fight versus Doflamingo, Luffy used an attack called Culverin. Basically what occurred is Luffy first withdrew his fist into his arm as though he were doing a Kong gun. But when Luffy actually went to go deliver the punch, his fist came out of his arm and it just kept stretching and did not stop. It went on forever. And so you would assume an attack like this would be less powerful than, say, Kong Gun, because of how long Luffy's arm first had to stretch. And while it may be a little bit weaker than Kong Gun, but it was not weak. And so I've been calling this attack Culverin, but if you were to translate it into English, it is called the Serpent Cannon. And in fact, Luffy even referred to his arm during this, when he actually used the attack and it was stretching all over the place, he called it Python. I do think that this attack could be some kind of foreshadowing to what Gear 4th Snake Man might be capable of and might be its specific strength. And so here's the facts guys, here is why this attack interests me so much. It's unexplained. Right, you can have people that can try and rationalize certain bits of it, but it's all theory, it's all prediction. Because we don't know specifically how it works. Doflamingo, during the fight with Luffy, went about explaining how Gear 4th worked to us, but he had no explanation for Culverin. As the punch was about to land on his face, we see Doflamingo say this: why? He didn't even need to tighten it this time. Just completely dumbfounded. The idea behind Gear 4th is to apply armament Haki to your rubbery body. Doing so makes your skin harder, therefore it is actually harder to stretch. But when Luffy pulls his fist into his arm itself, there's such a force created when it comes back out that creates the massive Kong Gun. So the idea though is that Luffy is not as stretchy as he would normally be. And this adds up with the fact guys that if you look at Luffy while in Gear 4th, all of his attacks, all of the scenes, in general, he is not as stretchy as he would have been or is in his base form. But the exception is Culverin. In the case of Culverin, Luffy ends up stretching far greater than he has ever done in any other situation, in any other form. Why? As I said guys, Doflamingo didn't tell us, the narrator didn't tell us, Luffy didn't tell us, but we will eventually need an answer. And so here's how I rationalize it. Luffy pulls his fist into his arm as he would do in pretty much every single attack in Gear 4th. Because Luffy's skin itself is harder due to the armament Haki, this increases his elasticity. So the force at which his fist emerges from his arm is incredible. So then how do you keep it stretching forever? Well, I think that perhaps Luffy may just reduce the amount of armament Haki in his arm. That is to say, make his arm less hard. So if armament Haki increases the tension of his skin, making his skin harder to stretch, then to keep it stretching, obviously you would need to remove this aspect of Gear 4th. Or at the very least, make it less strong. But you guys have to keep in mind that he started off this attack as though it was a normal Kong gun. So basically I'm suggesting that Culverin works almost like a rocket, where you have that initial takeoff due to the increased elasticity of what is essentially a Kong gun. Then you remove a lot of that tension so that once the force has come out like a rocket, it just keeps going. There's nothing that pulls it back in. So basically, I guess in order to understand this, or in order to define this, you would have to assume that Luffy can control the hardness of the armament Haki placed on his body. Basically, the power of the armament Haki. And I do think that this makes a lot of sense. Look at someone like Katakuri and Luffy. Katakuri has superior armament Haki, which I would assume means that he has harder armament Haki. Which means that if Luffy were to ever obtain his level of armament Haki, he would need to make his even harder. Which implies levels that can be attained. And if you can attain various levels of hardness to your armament Haki, you can potentially control this level of hardness as well. So Luffy can say use max level armament Haki, or use low level armament Haki. I hope that this makes sense. But to be honest with you, the explanation for this isn't all that important. All that is really important is that you know that Luffy can use an ability like Culverin. And so now let's move on to the next point, which is that within Gear 4th, Bound Man or Tank Man, how Luffy delivers attacks is he draws his body in on itself. This is what he does for every single attack. Now, Bound Man specifically usually focuses around attacks with the legs and the arms, but he also did a headbutt attack as well versus Doflamingo. Luffy only contracts areas that are covered with armament Haki, again due to the increased hardness or the increased elasticity. You draw your body or your arm or your legs in, and the force that comes out is incredible. I know that I've said that a lot of times, but I need to make sure I'm clear. The one place in Gear 4th Bound Man that Luffy typically does not put any Haki whatsoever is his torso or his stomach. And so the reason why Luffy does this is because the main purpose of Bound Man is to actually deliver attacks. I know Tank Man is kind of a contradiction, but typically speaking, you can't damage somebody with your stomach. Now Luffy has the capability of placing Haki over his stomach while in Gear 4th Bound Man, but he mainly does so for defense. If an opponent gets close enough to him, tries to attack him, he can move the Haki over his stomach to sort of absorb some of that impact. Guys, I really hope that you are following me. Now, going back to Bound Man, if he can use an attack like Culverin where he stretches endlessly with his fists, he could also do that with his legs or even with a headbutt-like attack. Wherever he's able to contract himself and then shoot out, potentially modulating the hardness of his armament Haki, he can just endlessly stretch and move his whatever around. So here is the idea. If Luffy had a particular form of Gear 4th, which focused mainly on his torso and his stomach, and he were to contract his entire body within on itself, you take the upper half of your body and the lower half of your body, and you move it together like you were doing a Kongun with your stomach itself, then potentially when it comes back out, Luffy can do a Culverin-like attack with his entire body stretching out just like a snake. And so guys, another important thing to keep in mind when Luffy used Culverin is he has an absurd amount of control over the direction in which his arm actually moves. So I do think that the same could potentially apply to this form or an attack within this form. The idea in my head is essentially Luffy contracts his entire body within each other and springs out, basically making Luffy fly. But while he's flying around, he has an absurd amount of control over his body so that he's like pinging off the air. But in order to speculate this, you have to justify why. Why did Luffy decide to use Snake Man and not any of his other Gear 4th techniques in this particular situation versus Katakuri? And the reason is the huge strength, the huge advantage this form would grant Luffy would be agility. If both Luffy and Katakuri are seeing slight glimpses of the future, then perhaps the winner of this fight is the one who can react the quickest to a change in the future. I see you punch left, so I will dodge right. But in this particular form, Luffy can change the direction in which he is attacking so quickly that before Katakuri can react, Luffy can change the direction of an attack. So you thought that I was attacking right, but now I am in fact attacking left. But Luffy could potentially also do this with the attack Culverin in Gear 4th Bound Man alone. The other huge advantage of this form is the fact that his body is constantly moving and Luffy can change where it is heading and what direction it is very quickly. So let's go back to Bound Man for a second. He used this ability Culverin against Doflamingo. What was the glaring weakness of Culverin? It's the fact that Luffy's main body was not moving. Doflamingo actually dodged the Culverin attack to attack Luffy. Now, he didn't end up doing any damage to him, but Katakuri would. Katakuri could completely ruin the attack itself because Luffy's body is just sitting there. The thing that Luffy is manipulating is his fist. His fist can dodge and move around and snake. But in this new form, his entire body can dodge, move around, and snake. Katakuri specifically said if Luffy tried to punch him with his right fist, then Katakuri would punch him in his right shoulder. But now the attack that will be aimed at his shoulder would miss because Luffy can manipulate his body to dodge it. And so I think the other question to ask is, how is this different from Tank Man, and how exactly would this look? Now, it would have been really helpful if we'd actually seen the normal version of Tank Man rather than Tank Man full version. Obviously, at the time that Luffy defeated Cracker, he was incredibly fat and full from eating all of his biscuits. But I want to speculate something. I want to speculate the difference between all of Luffy's forms of Gear 4th is the placement of the Haki. Before, I've talked about potentially the placement of the air, but maybe the air isn't important. Maybe it just matters where you put the Haki. And so in Bounce Man or Bound Man, Luffy places the majority of his Haki on his arms and his legs and his back, but his stomach is completely not covered. In Sank Man, his stomach is covered with Haki as well as his arms, but there is no Haki on his chest or upper back. For me, there are two possibilities. The first possibility is that Luffy's entire body, minus potentially his legs, are coated with Haki. Stomach, chest, arms, and head, all of it. The main force obviously comes from Luffy springing out of his body itself, but he would need Haki to coat either his head or his arms, whatever he wants to actually attack with, to deal damage. Some might say that that's not possible, but if Luffy can control the strength of the Haki, it is possible. You just have to spread around more of your body. We've seen Luffy coat more of his body in Haki from time to time. But I think that more specifically, I think that it will definitely coat his stomach and chest if this idea is anywhere close to reality. If the idea behind this form is initially coating your stomach and or chest to sort of contract in, and then afterwards you release the amount of Haki in order to make it stretch further, like Culverin, then potentially you can move that Haki that you would have normally placed forever in its strongest version on one particular body part, you can move it around to others. So once Luffy has stretched into Snake Man, then he can take the Haki that he saved by reducing its strength and place it on whatever he wants to actually attack with. And I do know that people will bring up at the end of the very latest chapter of One Piece, we actually got to see Luffy as he was going into Gear 4. There's specifically weird Haki-like marks around his eyes, and there doesn't appear to be any Haki on his stomach. As for the Haki around his eyes, I don't think that this is significant. Right, Haki acts with his rubber body in order to make it more bouncy. He won't have any eye attacks, I don't think. As for the Haki only coating his arms and not his body, the same was true of Bound Man when we first saw it. Luffy put Haki in one arm and then blew into it, and it wasn't until much later that he coated his other arm and the rest of his body in Haki. But anyway guys, these are my thoughts and my rationale for my thoughts. There have been many other people that have speculated things relating to what Snake Man could be like, and I honestly think that my thoughts are similar. Sean Holmes pointed out to me on Twitter Fukuro and his ability to sort of move his body around, change shape, and dodge. This could be some kind of foreshadowing, some kind of inspiration. But it seems like if there is any consensus to draw, it's that this form for Luffy, being Snake Man, will be highly agile, potentially be able to change shape. And rather than deal damage or absorb impact, specifically focuses around dodging. But as always guys, I want to hear what you have to say about this. Let me know if you agree or disagree and why. Share your thoughts. Like the video if you like the video, dislike the video if you dislike the video. Make sure to subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content. And as always guys, have a wonderful day.